Vancouver, Washington, 1982 and 1983. I worked 2 stints in Vancouver on the Burlington Northern Railroad Switchman's Extra Board. The first stint I lived in a boarding house about a mile from the Vancouver Yard from the middle of October 1982 until January of 83. The next stint I lived in my travel trailer near the Vancouver BN Yard office from October of 83 until January of 84. I have many stories from those 2 stints, but I couldn't tell you exactly what stint they occurred. This was a while back. There was and still is a B yard, main yard, roundhouse, rib shed, as well as several industries still smoking this day to switch out. The caboose is still the caboose track, just without cabooses. The extra board was long, and I don't think I made 40 hours in a week but a couple times. Almost all the jobs I worked were night switch engines, so I had a lot of free time during the day. I mostly spent it by going to meetings, playing my harmonica, reading, and taking long walks. On one of those walks, I saw a sign on a house in the business district of downtown Vancouver that read, "Fortune Teller Palm Reading." Curious, I knocked on the door, and a 40-something heavy lady with dark eyes wearing a headdress straight out of the movies answered the door and invited me in. After asking a few questions, I determined that I really couldn't afford to get my fortune told at that time. The lady seemed to be eyeball screwing me. Before making my exit, however, she convinced me to help her rearrange a couple of large pieces of furniture. It must have been during my first stint that a train master wanted to qualify me as a switch foreman. When I asked about the qualifications, she said that 3 trips as a helper were enough to qualify me. I thought it was odd, but did not argue, and was assigned a few jobs as foreman. There was a yardmaster by the name of Jeffries who loved to talk about the top of a mountain he owned, and there were 3 laid-off switchmen from Seattle in the same position as myself. I met a clerk while working in Vancouver who was a man at the time and later became a lady by operation. She eventually died of AIDS. The twist to this story is that in 1992, shortly after my mother's funeral, I was discussing the family tree with elder relatives. It turns out that the Vancouver clerk was my 3rd cousin, who I recall meeting once in my early youth, long before we worked together in Vancouver. 25 years later, I was a passenger train Amtrak conductor working out of Seattle. They hired a new baggage lady at the King Street station, humping and throwing bags, who later became a trainman and engineman clerk. As I got to know her, I found out that she had worked in Vancouver at the same time as I did. I had a few years of interaction with her concerning everyday operations and overtime work. Eventually, I nicknamed her Gail with a Y. I would talk with her occasionally about Vancouver, not really remembering her, although I was positive she worked there as a crew caller during the same time as I had, knocking on my door a time or two to give me a work assignment. Some of us fondly referred to them as call girls. There was an old SP&S railroad rule that if you lived within a mile of the crew office and did not own a phone, a crew caller would come to your residence and give you your work call in person. One day in 2016, as I was talking to her, I had a flashback. It was her in 1983. A pretty little thing knocking on my door. "I remember you now. You were a lot younger then," I told her bluntly. She said we all were.